World Communion Sunday. An exciting day. I always have memories of the church that I grew up at, and they would put a long table out for everybody to display these breads from dozens upon dozens of different countries on. They had little flags that would go by the bread, and communion would take so long because everybody had all these options. And I just remember being at the back of the line and wondering, when do I get to pick my bread? I hope that they don't run out of the good bread. And there was always plenty of bread. There was always an abundance. And afterwards, they would pull out Ziploc baggies and everybody would take a piece of all these different loaves home and enjoy the variety of bread that had been lovingly made. I found out a few years ago they started doing something different, which I found really awesome. They have a fellowship dinner or fellowship lunch after World Communion Sunday where everybody brings soup. All these different crock pot meals. So all of the bread that is made then moves over to the fellowship meal and gets eaten with soup. How holy and amazing is that? Like, I feel like that's like Jesus kind of like meal. Like, oh, we've got bread here. Let's go eat it together in one big family and laugh and cry and rejoice and all of those things that you do together as a family of believers. Our scripture today comes from the Gospel of Mark. I love Mark. It's my favorite gospel for many reasons. Mark likes to get to things immediately. It's quick, it moves fast, and once you finally think you catch your breath, you're at the next thing, an event, and it's just go, go, go. Mark also puts us in an interesting place by reminding us that throughout the Gospel of Mark, which was intended to be experienced as one full story, that throughout the Gospel of Mark, the insiders become the outsiders, and the outsiders become the insiders. So it's a constant reminder through our scripture of where do we fall on that spectrum of insider and outsider, and how do we remember the message of Christ and carry that out instead of becoming one or the other extreme. So our scripture today comes from Mark chapter 2, verses 13 through 17, where Jesus calls Levi. Jesus went out again beside the sea. A whole crowd gathered around him and taught them. As he was walking along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth. And he said to him, "Follow me." And Levi got up and followed. And as he sat at dinner in Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were also sitting with Jesus and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. And when the scribes of the Pharisees saw this, that Jesus was eating with sinners and tax collectors, they said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" When Jesus heard this, he said to them, Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have come to call not the righteous, but the sinners. I really like my personal commentary to that scripture, and it's, this is sassy Jesus, who is telling the Pharisees, I need you to get it right here. I think you got it a little wrong. And Jesus in Mark and in other parts of the different Gospels has a lot of attitude towards some of the religious leaders that he encounters. From the start of Jesus' ministry, especially in Mark, he is shattering boundaries. He eats with unclean people. He heals on the Sabbath. He touches lepers. He even claims divine authority to forgive sin. This is God's invasion of the world through Christ. And God is doing some powerful things through Jesus. And part of this ministry that Jesus is doing, part of this holiness that is working here, is that Jesus is going to throw the authority and the power upside down. He's going to flip some tables over and change some minds. And he's going to do a lot of things that make people really uncomfortable. He didn't come to sit in the pews. He came to share God's love with all that he met, wherever they may be. He actually went to them. If we hear in this story, Jesus is walking along and he sees Levi and goes to him. He doesn't wait for Levi to come to him. He goes to Levi and then he says, "Follow me." Starting to hear this step of tension as we get comfortable in our faith and comfortable in our worship service. The scripture reminds us maybe we shouldn't be so comfortable. I drew a little, when I work on my sermons, I write out my scripture and then I color and I think and create. And I drew out this little sketch while I was processing. Here's some of this is how I start my sermons here. And it says the table, and then there's arrows going in and out. And around each arrow it says you're invited. And that's what I feel like summarizes the scripture today, is that you're invited. But not only are you invited to this table, but we are invited to take the table out into the world, just like Jesus did, sitting with people who never thought they would be invited around a table. He met them where they were, and then he said, "You're welcome at this table. You, the leper who is not clean. You, the paralytic who needs to be healed. You, the sinner who needs to be forgiven. You're all at this table, all invited. And you know what? At this table, you will know what it means to be clean. You will know what it means to be healed. You will know what it means to be forgiven. And you will know what new life is all about. And it's about the power of Jesus and the amazing things that he can do and his promises to break down boundaries, shattered walls, and make all of us welcome. The table isn't meant to just be one thing. The table is that one thing that is meant to be all things to all people. That was a question I was asked in my ordination process, is the church to be all things to all people? And that's a hard thing to wrestle with. And my personal answer is, not every individual church can be all things to all people. But the table should always be all things to all people. It's not an answer I was comfortable with, but it's one that I wrestled with a lot to get there. But the table is where there should be no limitations, there should be no boundaries, there should be no walls. It's all broken down, and all are there. Tax collectors, sinners, everybody. There's room for all. At the Leadership Academy that I was at in Indianapolis a couple weeks ago, one of the most beautiful things about it is it really reminded me of how comfortable I am in my comfort zone. Walking into it, I had a lot of opinions and ideas and critiques, and I walked in, I was like, the Wi-Fi isn't working. The screen isn't projecting well. Like, all of these very, millennial ideas of what a leadership thing should be. But then I sat there, and the speakers they had were amazing, dropping knowledge and wisdom left and right, talking about Christ, the new general minister and president for the denomination came and spoke to us. A small group of about 45 people. We were one of her first speaking engagements after she was voted in as the first person of color and a female head of a denomination. How awesome is that, to have her come and share her love of Christ with us and her passion for the church? It was amazing and it was holy. And what I realized is the uniqueness that was sitting around that table where we were listening to her love for Christ. It was one of the most diverse groups of people I've been in a long time. The group of people that I have shared meals with, a group that I have prayed with, I have cried with, I laughed with. And I'm not just talking diverse racially. Yes, there were people from various Hispanic origins. There were white people, there were black people, people from Asian descent. It was beautiful color-wise, amazing. But not only that, we all spoke different languages. We had people whose first language was English, people whose French was their first language, Spanish was the first language of people, and all different kinds of languages. There were probably at least 5 different languages represented there. How beautiful is that? But not only that, age diversity. I fell kind of right in the middle of the people there. There were people in their young 20s there and ranged all the way up into their 80s at this leadership retreat, wanting to know more about new church and transformation. And it was amazing and holy. And there were a diversity of genders and orientations represented there too. Wow, what diversity. In a small-ish group of 45 people, I don't know that I've ever seen such a mix of people. And that's what the table's supposed to be about. The worship where prayers are spoken in Spanish and scripture is read in French. And maybe I don't understand what these words mean, but the Spirit is moving and engaging and telling us we are all here and this is all good and holy. How powerful is that? That's the table that Christ set for us. That's the table that Christ invites us to each and every day. A table that is supposed to bring us all together, where we're all invited in our genuine and authentic selves. What I loved and what I've realized I've become used to is when I go to worship services where different languages might be spoken, often they are translated into English so I understand, which I appreciate that great act of hospitality. But that week, nothing was translated. It was just spoken in the language it was spoken in. And there's a lot of beauty and holiness in that. In people being able to just come and be present and worship without having to worry about being anything other than authentic. This is what Christ did, is bringing all of these people together. Inspiring healing, inspiring wholeness and forgiveness. And that's what we see in this scripture of Mark, is a start of a tension between the comfortable, the religious authorities, and these people who just need to be fed, who need to be loved, who need to know that there is room for them at the table. And that's what church is about. How do we take the table out into the world instead of just leaving it in our building for ourselves? How do we share Christ's love with all so